Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Carol, and I'm going to introduce John, and he is going to share about his story that's in the fourth edition of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And John, I'm turning it over to you. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us today.
All right. Thank you. I'm John and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm so grateful to be here, grateful to be sober, and I'm grateful to be alive. And wow. Um, I'll just start by saying I'm a bit nervous. I've never done anything like this before. I've been um I'll start by saying what Carol asked me to share, which is I got sober at age 18. Uh My sobriety date is October 1st, 1991. I I currently live in a town called Mill Valley, California. We're in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I have been here since 1997, which is around the same time that I started putting my story on paper. Uh, I have not been very um, forthright with my authorship of my story in the Big Book. I wasn't quite. I have ego problems and pride problems and humility problems, as many of us do in this program, and decided I would kind of keep this under wraps when I found out my story was in the book. I just wasn't sure how to handle it, and so this is a little new for me, speaking at a group level about this topic. So bear with me. I'm not a regular at this. I've only revealed at a group level that my story is in the book maybe 3 times over the last 25 years. So I value my anonymity. I am in a career where I work in the film industry, and at times have a little bit of minor notoriety there, and would appreciate trying to keep it that way. I'm happy after the recording's over to answer questions about my career, but uh, I think that's it. I guess I'll get started. I'll start, but Carol asked me, I guess many people titled their story. I pulled this folder from my underneath my house. I kept my correspondence with New York when I submitted my story, and many people titled their stories. I guess I did not. I just I just titled it fourth edition. I just said here, and so the name Missing Link, which is the name of my story, was done by somebody. I have no idea. Somebody on the literature committee, I presume. I'll just start by telling you a real quick, that when I moved to California from where I grew up in Chicago in 1997, I had been sober about 6 years, and was having trouble finding a job, and was just a recent college graduate. And I called back to Michigan, which is really where I got sober, and spoke with my sponsors there. And one of my sponsors, who has since passed away, his name was Ron, uh, was a World War II veteran. He was a veteran in Korea. He was 50 years older than me, and he was tough as nails. And so he had very little patience for my whining. And when I called him and I said, "Hey, Ron, how's it going?" And he said, "Oh, good. How are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm okay." And he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, I'm having trouble finding a job. And, everybody here was the dot-com boom in San Francisco, and everybody's driving a brand new car. And I'm, working temp jobs, and poor me, poor me, poor me." And he said into the phone, you're going to get drunk. And then he hung up the phone on me. Except he wasn't so nice about it. He was more screaming about it. And so I said, okay, I called him back. I said, why do you say I'm going to get drunk? And he says, because you've forgotten who you are and where you come from and your last drunk. And therefore, if you forgot your last drunk, you're doomed to repeat and you're going to go back to drinking. And I said, okay, because he did not like my whining about my high class problems, really my first world problems, and he was right. And he's asked me, he said, remind me, did you ever do a formal first step? And I said, no, I don't know what you mean by that. He said, did you ever write down your story, the instances of what, was the examples of powerlessness and unmanageability in your life? And I said, no. And he said, do that, do that. And so I did. And I had a sponsor here in San Francisco where I got sober in Michigan. They used to suggest you get 3 sponsors. And before I left the Midwest, they suggested a name of a guy that they knew that I got sober in our neck of the woods. And I asked him to be my sponsor. And when I started hearing around meetings that they were looking for stories for the 4th edition of the Big Book, they asked for they were looking for, and I saved the handout that I got from a GSR from one of my meetings. They were asking for people who did not have much identity in the Big Book. They were looking for stories that weren't current at that point and after the 3rd edition, often reflected. And I got sober very young. I grew up Jewish. I had a history of depression and this sort of thing, and I didn't feel like there was much in the way of these stories discussed in the current in that edition. And so I asked my sponsor if he thought maybe I should send in my first step as it, and put it into, phrase it Big Book ease and then send it in. And he said, I think that's a good way to serve. So I did it. And I was I kind of rushed through it, making it ready for the deadline. I remember it says the deadline for receipt of manuscripts is June 1st, 1998. They wanted it to be 3,500 words. And I remember my then girlfriend, my now wife, was just moved to California to join me out here. She's also in the program. I think I saw her join in. She's shopping at Macy's. Um, anyhow, I had quickly typed this up and printed it out and had her proofread it and threw it in an envelope and just barely made the deadline. And then, as I've heard others say, Carol sent me some of the recordings of the other members who have sent in their stories, the other authors like Brian. I received a few pieces of correspondence over the next several years. Then that was it. Everything was done snail mail. And so I got, I'm looking back through my folder here, and I got my first letter in June 30th of 1998. It was from a guy named Doug Richardson from Central Office. And he said, that they were just recognizing we received your submission. Thank you. As you can imagine, we've got thousands of stories to review, and we'll get back to you. And so then the next correspondence was about 2 years later, July 25th, 2000. I received a letter from a new person, Lois Fisher. She said, your story for the Big Book is still under review. You've probably been wondering what we've been up to. We're still reviewing lots of stories. To date, there's been no final decision, and we'll get back to you. Thanks for your patience. And then another year went by, and now May 2001, I got another letter, and this one says, this is from Vincina McCarthy, publications director. And this one was the one that was informing me on May 7th, 2001, that my story had been selected for the big book. It did not at that time tell me anything else other than, basically, we're sending you this assignment of copyright. So I signed my rights away. The story is now owned by Works Publishing and AA World Services, and then on November 8th, 2001, I received in the mail this here big book and this letter that said, we have named your story The Missing Link, and thank you for your service. And that's the last correspondence I ever got from them. So with all that preface, I will go ahead and read you what I wrote and try to call out, as Carol asked, when they change something that I know to be different than my language, what I wrote. So it's on page 281. It's in the the area they stopped in time, which basically means I'm a lightweight, and tapped out early. But it's yeah, I'll go ahead. So the missing link, he looked at everything as the cause of his unhappiness except alcohol. When I was 8 or 9 years old, life suddenly became very difficult. Feelings began to emerge that I did not understand. Depression crept into my life as I started to feel alone, even in crowded rooms. In fact, life didn't make much sense to me at all. It's hard to say what sparked all of this, to pinpoint one fact or event that changed everything forever. The fact of the matter was, I was miserable from very early on in my life. It was all very confusing. I remember isolating on the playground, watching all the other children laughing and playing and smiling and not feeling like I could relate at all. I felt different. I didn't feel as if I was one of them. Somehow I thought I didn't fit in. My school marks soon reflected these feelings. My behavior and attitude seemed to be troublesome to everyone around me. I soon began spending more time in the principal's office than in the classroom. My parents, perplexed by such an unhappy son, began having difficulties. My house was soon filled with the sounds of arguments and yelling about how to handle me. I found that running away from home could supply me with some sort of temporary solace. So what that's referring to is I used to pack a bag. I don't think I packed it in a red bandana and put on a stick, but I used to pack my backpack and throw in, I don't know, a box of Pop-Tarts, a canteen of water, and say, I'm leaving forever, tearful. And what I normally did was I would go and climb on top of my school, which was a couple blocks away, and I would spend the night on top of the school. I tried to sleep on there, and was often discovered there. I guess the cops figured out where to find me, and it wasn't that hard. And they would come and shine a light on me and order me to come down and put me in the back of the cop car and drive me home. And I don't know, I was young. I was probably 10 years old. Until, of course, the police would find me and bring me back to my house and my worried parents. About that time, I started seeing therapists and specialists, each with a different theory and a different solution. They conducted special tests and interviews designed to get to the root of my troubles, and came to the conclusion that I had a learning disability and was depressed. Specifically, what they diagnosed me with was ADHD, and this is in the early 80s, before anyone had really heard that term before. So this was like new to my parents and new to me, and no one knew. We didn't know what that meant. I went to the University of Chicago where I had met a bunch of psychiatrists, and this is an early diagnosis, and they were not pushing that diagnosis often back then. So it was pretty clear to them that this is what I was dealing with. And, I had high marks on these standardized tests and stuff, but when I was in the classroom, I just could not perform. The psychiatrist started me on some medication, and the problems in school started to clear up. Even some of the depression began to ease up for a bit. However, something still seemed fundamentally wrong. Whatever the problem, I soon found what appeared to be the solution to everything. At age 15, I traveled with my family to Israel. My brother was to be bar mitzvahed atop Masada. There was no legal drinking age, so I found it quite easy to walk into a bar and order a drink. New Year's Eve fell in the middle of the trip, and since the Jewish calendar celebrates a different New Year than the Gregorian calendar, that is the editor's term, not mine. I didn't know what that, I had to look up the term Gregorian when they sent me this big book and I read that. I was like, what does that mean? I think what I told them, if I look back at my story, is basically that I think I wrote the word American calendar or Western calendar or something like that. The only celebration was being held in the American sector of a university. That university was a Hebrew university in Jerusalem. I got drunk for the first time that night. It changed everything. A stop at a local bar began the evening. I ordered a beer from a waitress, and as I took the first sip, something was immediately different. I looked around me at the people drinking and dancing and smiling and laughing, and all of a sudden, all of whom were much older than I. Suddenly, I felt like I belonged. I'll just interject there too that what that was I was on this family trip through my synagogue with my little brother who was being bar mitzvahed. He was 13 or about to be 13, and a bunch of other kids from our synagogue. And then there was a whole bunch of college age kids on our trip, and my parents and a lot of the other parents. And so I felt somewhere neatly in the middle at age 15 with all these different kids. And I was pretty awkward. And a bunch of the older kids asked if I wanted to join them on New Year's Eve to go to this university. And I asked my parents, can I go? And they said yes. And I think they knew that there would be drinking there, but I don't think they knew, what effect that would have on me. So they, on our way to this party at the university, we stopped at a bar on a street called Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem. And then it was at that place that I began the night of my first drunk. From there, I made my way to the university where I found hundreds of other Americans celebrating New Year's Eve. Before the night was over, I had started a fight with a number of college-age drunken fellows and returned to the hotel stinking drunk and riddled with bruises. Ah, yes, what a grand evening it was. I fell in love that night with a beverage. What that was we went to the party at the university, and when we got to the room, I was a couple drinks in and starting to feel buzz, and there was the room was filled with about half American kids who were foreign exchange students, and then there was about the other half were Israeli kids, and you could tell them apart because most of them were wearing Israeli military fatigues, and one of them was pretty sloppy drunk, and one of the kids I was with pointed him out and said, "Oh, look at that guy. He's such an idiot." someone should really go pour a beer over that guy's head. And so I said, I'll do it. And I went over, not thinking straight that this military kid might have some chops with fighting, and poured a beer over his head and looked back at the kids I were with, and they were all laughing and thought that was funny. And then the Israeli kids took me outside and started beating me up and kicking me and punching me and throwing beers at me, and the American kids ran out and took them off of me and then escorted me back to the hotel. My clothes were torn. My parents were at the bar uh, watching the ball drop on TV, and I saw them at the bar and I said, "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad." And they were just like worried. Oh my God, what happened here? And that was the start. That's all I'll go on. Returning to the States, I was determined to continue with my newfound love affair. I found myself trying to convince my friends to join me, but I was met with resistance. So my other friends did not want to drink like this when I explained, hey, I discovered drinking and getting drunk is lots of fun. And you get in fights and it's adventurous. And they were like, no, thanks. Uh, Still determined, I set out to find new friends, friends who could help me maintain this fantastic solution to my most desperate problems. My escapade started as a weekend pursuit and progressed into a daily obsession. At first, it took several beers to get me drunk to my satisfaction. However, within 3 years, it took a fifth and a half of vodka, a bottle of wine, and several beers in the evening's time to satisfactorily black me out. I would obtain alcohol by any means. That meant lying, stealing, and cheating. My motto was, if you felt like I did, you'd have to get drunk too. So what that's about is I made a regular habit out of going to friends' houses when they're, or even my grandparents' houses or my own house, and stealing alcohol, throwing it in my backpack, smuggling it out. I went to, you know, my grandfather had a big bar down in his basement, and I would just take whatever looked like it was still relatively full, sneak it in my bag, and then bring it home to Chicago. Um, or steal from other people's parents' houses, their liquor cabinets, that sort of thing. Um, as the feelings of hopelessness and depression progressed, so did my drinking. Thoughts of suicide came more and more frequently. Uh, I should add that when going back to earlier, when it says that I started seeing therapists and specialists, it was around that time, around age 13, I started having feelings of killing myself. And this was a feeling that persisted with me um, until I reached the rooms of AA, and became, from occasional feelings to the end of my drinking when I was 18 to being a daily obsession, like making plans and finding, I found a gun at where I worked, and my employers kept firearms in the basement. I worked in a furniture store, and the owners of the furniture store had a shooting range in the basement. And I would go down there and kind of look at the guns and play with the guns and fantasize about, okay, I'm gonna take one of these pistols home with me one day, or kill myself in the basement of this furniture store in Chicago. Uh, Thoughts and suicide came more and more frequently. It felt as if things were never going to change. Progress with my therapist came almost to a complete halt. The hopelessness was compounded by the fact that the one thing that was bringing me relief, the one thing that I counted on to take the pain away, which was alcohol, was ultimately destroying me. The end, I feared, was close. And my last semester in high school marked my bottom. It was everyday drinking then. Since I had already been accepted to college, I consciously decided to make that last semester one big party. But it was no fun at all. I was miserable. I graduated narrowly and took a job at a local garage. So at that point, at, right after high school graduation, I worked two jobs. I worked at this furniture company, and then I got a job changing tires on cars in Niles, Illinois. And it was at that point that things started getting really dark, where I was spending a lot of time dwelling on suicide and chasing it all away with alcohol. And it was a very, very difficult, dark time. So it says it was difficult to manage my drinking and a job since they were both full time, but I concocted all kinds of lies to ensure that nothing would interfere with my drinking. And after being repeatedly reprimanded at work for being late in the mornings, I made up a story to hide the fact that I was always hungover. Sorry, this makes me emotional. I told my manager that I had cancer and I needed to go to the doctor for treatment every morning. I would say anything I needed to say to protect my drinking. So that for me is still something I seldom ever talk about, and I really dislike about myself that alcohol brought me to this point. But I was drinking every night and getting drunk and would show up to work hungover. I'm supposed to be there at 7 a.m. I could never make it there on time. And I would walk in, sometimes wander in at 11 a.m. and the manager would be like, "What the heck, man? Where were you?" And so after over and over, I decided he brought me into his office, said, "If you cannot show up on time, we are going to fire you, man." And I said, "Would you just back off, man? I am late every day because I'm at the hospital getting treatment for cancer." And you know, I can kind of laugh about that now, but it is something that really burns deep in me that I really dislike about my story and what the depth to that to me was a really deep hole that I dug right there. A line I'd stepped over that just left me uncomfortable. And so when my sponsor said, "Go write your story, remember who you really are," this was like, I'd done a whole lot of horrible things, stealing, cheating, lying, but this was the most despicable feeling I had ever had, something that alcohol could make me say or do something like that. And in some way, I've always feared karma. I've had a lot of health problems over the last 30 years, and I have a higher incidence than normal, a likelihood towards colon cancer. And so I've been lamenting the day when my doctor is going to tell me that, your time has come. But uh, this really hurts to this day to read this and to think about it. And reminds me why I'm so lucky to have found this program and escape that kind of way of lying and cheating in life. Sorry to be dwelling on all this so much. More often, I was having these little moments of clarity. Times I knew for sure that I was an alcoholic. Times when I was looking at the bottom of a glass, asking myself, why am I doing this? Something had to give, something had to change. I was suicidal, evaluating every part of my life for what could be wrong. It culminated in one last night of drinking and staring at the problem. It made me sick to think about, and even sicker to continue drinking it away. I was forced to look at my drinking, as the chief suspect. So, what that paragraph is referring to is that I had made a bud in sobriety named Dave, not sobriety in drinking, who was lived a couple blocks from me, and he was also a very heavy drinker, probably an alcoholic. We were 18 years old. His name was Dave, and Dave was court ordered to AA for drunk driving. And they really threw the book at him because um, he was a joker like me. And when he got pulled over for drunk driving, he got pulled over by Officer Michael Jackson. And so he thought it would be funny when they asked him to walk the white line if he did the moonwalk. And so he did the moonwalk, and then the judge like sentenced him to AA for what seemed like years. And so Dave would come home from his AA meetings, and he would bring home the big book. And his parents were building a house in Arizona. And so they left him with his much older brother who was of drinking age and would buy us alcohol. And so like every night was a party at Dave's house down couple blocks from our house. And so Dave would call me and say, come over, and we'd start drinking. And then Dave would start to tell me some of the stories he would hear in the AA meetings. It was not unusual for him to put his shot glasses on top of his copy of the big book and pour shots for us. And we would drink directly off the big book. And then he would tell me, he said, he was a Jewish guy too. And he said, oh man, you should hear what they say at these meetings. The level of propaganda that they spout is on a Nazi level, which piqued my interest. I was like, are you kidding me? Let me look at this. So I would start thumbing through the big book. And so I had some familiarity already with what was in this book before ever coming to a meeting. And it's what got me to thinking that maybe what I was doing was alcoholic. And so this last night of drinking was not a significant one. It was a sick feeling when I was looking at the bottom of this beer glass and I realized what I was doing to myself. And I kind of extrapolated out. If I'm doing this every day and I'm about to go to college and they have nothing but alcohol available at all times at college, I'm never going to go to class. I'm not going to participate at all. I'm just going to sit around and get drunk every day. What's the point? Why not just kill myself right now? Why prolong this? And it was at that point that I realized, you know what? I don't think I've ever told my therapist about my drinking. It's like I've just conveniently left that out because I was afraid I was protecting it from him or anyone else calling me out. So I'll go back to it. The next day I went to work late as usual, and all day long I could not stop thinking about this very real problem. I could go no further. What was happening to me? I remember it very clearly. I was working on this car, putting tires on it, and I remember listening to my Walkman headphones on, listening to Metallica. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this group, and it's can be very dark, heavy metal music, and I remember feeling very suicidal at that point. Um, Therapy hadn't fixed my life. All those sessions, I was just miserable. I was still miserable. I might as well have just killed myself. Drinking was my way into oblivion. It was in one last desperate fight for a solution. I reviewed my life, searching for the missing link. So that was my words, but I did not title the story that whoever read it extracted that out and titled it for me that. I had left out some crucial bit of information that would lead to a breakthrough. Or had I left out some crucial bit of information that would lead me to a breakthrough, making it possible for life to become just a little bit more bearable? No, there was nothing. Except, of course, my drinking. The next morning, I went to see my therapist. I told him I decided to quit therapy because after 8 years, it wasn't working. But I decided to tell him how I had been searching through my life for that missing link and had come up with only one thing I had never told him, that I drank. He began asking me questions. He asked me about quantities, frequency, what I drank. Before he was even halfway through, I broke down and began sobbing. I cried, "Do you think I have a problem with drinking?" He replied, "I think that is quite obvious." I then asked, do you think I'm an alcoholic?" And he answered, "You're going to have to find out for yourself." And he pulled out a list of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings out of his desk drawer. He had already highlighted the young people's meetings. I never thought that he had any clue about my drinking. And when I review this, I'm like, why did he have meetings of AA with young people's meetings already highlighted? It was like as if he was waiting for me to bring this up. And I don't know if I've tried making contact with him. I don't know if he's still alive or not. He has never responded to me since I got sober after that. But he saved my life. He told me to go home and not drink at all for the rest of the day. He would call me at 9 p.m. and wanted to hear that I hadn't taken a drink. It was rough, but I went home and I locked myself in my room, sweating it out until he called. He asked if I had had a drink. I told him I had not and asked what I should do next. He told me to do the same thing tomorrow, except tomorrow I should also go to the first meeting on the list he had highlighted. The next day, I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was 18 years old. In the parking lot, I sat in the car for about 15 minutes before the meeting started, trying to work up the courage to go in and face myself. I remember finally working up the nerve to open the door and get out, only to close the door, dismissing the notion of going into the meeting as ridiculous. This dance of indecisiveness went on for about 50 times. That might be an exaggeration, but it's probably 7 times before I went in. Had I not gone in, I believe I would not be alive today. Excuse me. The room was very smoky and filled with apparently happy people. Finding a seat in the back, I sat down and tried to make sense of the format. When the chairperson asked if there were any newcomers present, I looked around and saw some hands go up, but I certainly wasn't ready to raise my hand and draw attention myself. The meeting broke up into several groups, and I followed one group down the hall and took a seat. They opened a book and read a chapter titled Step 7. So this was the 12 and 12, obviously. After the reading, they went around the table for comments, and for the first time in my life, I found myself surrounded by people I could really relate with. I no longer felt as if I was a total misfit, because here was a room full of people who felt precisely as I did, and a major weight had been lifted. I happened to be in the last chair around the table to speak, and confused by the reading, all I could say was, "What the heck are shortcomings?" Except I didn't use the word heck. You can fill in your imagination what I might have said. But the truth is, at age 18, I had not heard much of the verbiage that we use in these rooms, and shortcomings was one of them. Along with many words that I needed a dictionary to look up at that age to define for me what are they talking about. A couple of members, realizing I was there for my first meeting, took me downstairs and sat down with me and outlined the program. I can recall very little of what was said, I remember telling these members that this program they outlined sounded like just what I needed, but I didn't think I could stay sober for the rest of my life. I remember being very concerned about that. Some of these guys were sober like 6 months, you know. One guy had 3 years. It seemed like the rest of my life to me. So it was concerning me. I didn't want to have to sign anywhere to say I'm committing to not drinking the rest of my life. But they said, sorry, where I lost my place. For the rest of my life. Exactly how was I supposed to not drink if my girlfriend breaks up with me, or if my best friend dies, or even through happy times like graduations, weddings, and birthdays? They suggested I could just stay sober one day at a time. They explained that it might be easier to set my sights on the 24 hours and to take on take on these other situations when and if they ever arrived. I decided to give sobriety a try, one day at a time, and I've done it that way ever since. When I entered Alcoholics Anonymous, I had done some damage physically. So that what that's referring to is uh, during my drinking, uh, when I would stop drinking, I noticed that I started seeing blood in my stool. And when I would resume drinking, the blood would go away. And when I stopped drinking for good, I saw that blood return and it never went away. And so it was I was about 2 to 3 years into sobriety. I was age 21, so I was about 3 years sober. My father had ulcerative colitis my entire lifetime when I was growing up. And I mentioned it to him, and he said, "You need to go see a gastroenterologist." And I went, and they diagnosed me also with this autoimmune disorder called ulcerative colitis. And for the last 30 plus years, I've been dealing with that. And it's been a very difficult part of my story of sobriety. It's to this day, I just got into remission about 2 to 3 years ago after a long, difficult bout of it that hospitalized me and has had me on many infusion medications. And now I'm under control for the first time. It was about a 7 year stretch of battling this, and I almost lost my colon in the midst of it. I was about 2 months away from surgery when the medication finally kicked in and I went into remission. So the doctors said that it was likely set into motion for me with my drinking and this abusing alcohol to such a difficult, high degree. Had It says I had a bouquet of mental quirks and was spiritually bankrupt. I knew I was powerless over alcohol and that I needed to be open-minded toward what people suggested for recovery. However, when it came to spirituality, I fought nearly every step of the way. Although raised in an ethnic and religiously Jewish household, I was agnostic and very resistant to anyone and anything that I perceived to be imposing religious beliefs. To my surprise, Alcoholics Anonymous suggested something different. The idea that religion and spirituality were not one and the same was a new notion. My sponsor asked that I merely remain open-minded to the possibility that there was a power greater than myself, one of my own understanding. He assured me that no person was going to impose a belief system on me and that it was a personal matter. Reluctantly, I opened my mind to the fact that maybe, just maybe, there was something to this spiritual life. Slowly but surely, I realized there was indeed a power greater than myself, and I soon found myself with a full-time God in my life. And following a spiritual path that didn't conflict with my personal religious convictions. Following this spiritual path made a major difference in my life. It seemed to fill that lonely hole that I used to feel with alcohol. My self-esteem improved dramatically, and I knew happiness and serenity as I had never known it before. I started to see the beauty and usefulness, sorry, in my own existence, and try to express my gratitude through helping others in whatever ways I could. A confidence and faith entered my life and unraveled a plan for me that was bigger and better than I could have ever imagined. And that is, that was true at 6 years of sobriety. And it's really, 33 years later, I can't even begin to explain how life is, well, maybe we can get into that in the Q&A, but it's just been amazing. It wasn't easy, and it never has been easy, but it gets so much better. Since that first meeting, my life has completely changed. 3 months into the program, I started college. So where I went to college was Michigan State University in East Lansing, Michigan, and they had a very good fellowship there and a deep um, a deep connection to the steps. They were one of the guys who helped author the 12 and 12, who helped write the traditions with Bill W., I guess, got sober there. And so there was this tradition of step and tradition meetings. So we were very much immersed in that there. While many of my college classmates were experimenting with alcohol for the first time, I was off at meetings and AA get-togethers, becoming active in service work and developing relationships with God, family, friends, and loved ones. I rarely thought twice about this, and it was what I wanted and I needed to do. Over the last 7 years, nearly everything I thought I could not stay sober through has happened. Indeed, sobriety and life are full of ups and downs. Occasionally, depression can creep back into my life and requires outside help. However, this program has provided me with the tools to stay sober through the death of my best friends. I'll speak to that in just a second. Failed relationships and good times like birthdays, weddings, and graduations. Life is exponentially better than it ever was before. I'm living out the life I used to fantasize about, and I have a whole lot of work to do, work still in front of me. I have hope to share and love to give, and I just keep going one day at a time, living this adventure called life. So just real quick, when I was, let's see, it was I think it was 1994. So when I was growing up, I had a friend in Chicago who I was very close with. We met at about age 8 or 9. We were like fourth graders, and we were friends all the way through high school. And it was probably about March of 1991 when I was coming close to my bottom. He came to me and said, "Hey, everybody has been talking about how you've been drinking too much, and I think you have a problem with alcohol and you need to quit." And his name was Derry. He was an Iranian kid. And unlikely friendship in that, in that fact, but we were all the area Chicago grew up when there was a lot of um, immigrants and Jews and that sort of thing, and we became tight. And so he came and told me, "You have a problem with drinking," and I told him, "Get out of my house. I never want to talk to you again." And what happened there was that he went off and started. He went off to college himself and I went off my way, and he was right. I got sober, and I put him on my 8-step list as a guy I needed to make amends to. I went over with my sponsors, and they said, "Yeah, you should make amends to that guy." And I kind of just said, "All right, I'll do so whenever I bump into him again." And so I was about 3 years into college, and he had gone off to the University of Kentucky, met a girl, fell in love with her, and then he learned, and we all knew when we were growing up, that he had a very oppressive father who was abusive to his mother, Derry's mother. And Derry's mother killed herself when he was an infant, when he was like 2. And no one ever told him that she killed herself. They just kind of told him that she died, and didn't explain to him the circumstances surrounding her death, that she took her own life because her husband basically was so oppressive. Now, this happened before, I knew him, obviously, but all of our parents knew, because word had gone around the neighborhood around that time that she had killed herself. And so it was kept a secret from him all these years. And it was in college that he found out. His brother finally revealed to him, his older brother who knew, that she'd killed himself, and in an argument blamed him, told him that it was his fault that his mom killed himself because she couldn't deal with having another kid, or something along these lines. And around that time, Derry's girlfriend broke up with him, and he took a shotgun and put it in his mouth and killed himself. And I got that word, and it devastated me. You know, he was on my 8-step list, and I was, I remember bawling my eyes out and calling my sponsors, and they told me, go to his funeral back in Chicago. And if you see anyone on your 8-step list that's there, you take that opportunity to make appointments with them all. I was very upset that I had lost this opportunity, basically because I had balked on moving immediately towards amends and said, yeah, I'll get to it. Uh, well, I got the opportunity to basically clear the rest of my list at his funeral. And I was asked to speak at his funeral. And I got up there and I told this story about what he did for me, and how he had suggested I get sober, and that I was an alcoholic, and that I didn't want to lose this opportunity again. And so I start my shares every day, every time with, I'm grateful to be alive, because I realized that his funeral, that I was the suicidal one, and I was supposed to be, having that funeral, and that I had this opportunity to do something different with my life because of him. And it forever made me grateful. And to this day, I need to, whenever I introduce myself, remind myself that I have a gift that is a precious gift. And it's a day of sobriety. It's a day to have alive, and I have nothing but opportunity. And so I a great thing happened out of those amends. At that funeral, I met up with some other kids that I grew up with, that we used to make movies in our backyards. Was one of the guys had a video camera. His dad had a video camera, and these other kids had gone off to University of Wisconsin and were majoring in film. And at Michigan State, I majored in psychology, but I was getting a specialization in film. And these kids said, "Hey, after we grow up, after we graduate from University of Wisconsin, we're planning to make a film company. Do you want to join us?" This is at the funeral. They said this. Would you, after I just made amends to the entire audience of this funeral, would you like to join us? And I was amazed. I said, "Yeah,." I think I would. And so after college, I was another year and a half or so. I graduated from college. and we started actually before I had graduated. We'd started this company, Subchapter S Corporation out of Chicago, and then started making videos and films for commercial clients. What idiots would trust a bunch of 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds to make their products for them? But we put together a business plan, and then we started hitting connections up through our parents and this sort of thing, and people started paying us to make little movies and stuff and commercials for their companies. It was like Boston Market Chicken and Blockbuster Video, and they were like usually promotional videos and this sort of thing. But it was that launched my career, which is in film. I work in the movies. I will go into specifics there after the recording's over, but yeah, that's kind of brings you up to date. I don't know if we want to do the Q&A now, and I can um, explain more, but thanks, I guess, for this opportunity. It's brought back a lot of memories, some painful and some really joyous, and I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you, John. I know everybody thanks you and they'll have a chance at the end, but now we're gonna turn it over to Carrie to ask you her questions. If you have questions you would like asked of John, please put them to me in the chat and I will ask them after Carrie finishes her interview with John. And we put in the chat if you want the recording to send a WhatsApp message to the link there, and it will be posted in a few days. And Carrie, thank you so much. John, you just touched my heart and I identify with so much of your story, and I really appreciate, I know you protect your anonymity and I really appreciate you doing this, and everybody can thank you after we finish all the questions. So if you have something you want to know, put it in the chat. I already have a few questions. So Carrie, I'm turning it over to you now.
Thank you, Carol. I'm Carrie. I'm an alcoholic. And John, wow, that was really, really amazing. Thank you for, giving us additional details and sharing so much. It really touched me as well, identified a lot. One question I wanted to ask is the name Missing Link. So you said it was put there by the Literature Committee. Have you thought about what you would have named it?
Uh, no, I mean, for some reason, I never stopped to think when I was writing it that it was gonna be titled and that I needed to come up with that. And yeah, to this day, I don't know what I would. I mean, no, I mean, I think what's remarkable to me is that su the thoughts of suicide were so frequent and heavy for me at the beginning, in my drinking, that I really it was nothing but darkness. I couldn't ever see a way out. And I guess it would be something hope related, because they say that, don't give up 15 minutes before the miracle happens. And I guess it would be something along those lines, that the miracle happened for me just 15 minutes later, and was holding on by fingernails, that, um, they got me here.
And tell us, thank you. Tell us, is there something that you wish you would have put in your writing that you'd left out?
Um, I mean, what's funny to me is that it's been, let's see, it was 1997, so it's like 27 years have passed. Something like that. Is my math off? I think it's 27 years, and so much has happened. Like that, like almost nothing had happened in my life by the time I had written it. And so much great stuff has happened in the interim. Um, it was around that time that my wife and I started dating. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. These are good tears. It was around that time we started dating. It opened up a whole new life. To regain my composure. Sorry.
It's okay. Take your time.
We have two beautiful daughters. My wife just walked in. This is my wife, Carrie. And we have my wife is sober too. And we met in sobriety. And we identified very much with one another. And she's been, you know, my cheerleader throughout. And I had a lot of doubts about myself and my career and my ability to do anything after growing up, with this ADHD, and hating myself so much, and teachers telling me, literally telling me and my parents I would never really amount to anything. I should look to alternative careers and this sort of thing. And I've already forgotten what your question was, but I got off on this tangent that the last 27 years are really when my story opened up and began for me. That it's just been absolutely outstanding and unbelievable what's happened with these girls who are super bright, do not have. I feel like, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Forrest Gump, and Forrest meets his son for the first time and looks and says, is he smart or is he like me? And that's kind of what I felt like when I met my kids, that I'd said nothing but troubles in school and nothing but troubles with the law and drinking and depression and suicide, and it was a struggle to stay alive. And our girls have not had anything like that. In fact, I've only scratched the surface with telling them anything about the truth of what happened in my childhood, and my wife as well. But we have told them that they know we don't drink, and they know we go to AA, but that's kind of it. They don't know my stories in the big book. They don't know anything about the reality of the situation. Maybe someday we'll tell them. I just don't want them to worry or even plant the thought in their own heads that this is where something they need to contend with. Just that they have the gene for drinking, and that we suggest they stay away from it if they can. Sorry, Carrie. My wife's name is also Carrie, by the way.
Nice to meet you, Carrie. I'm Carrie. Just to share, I'd read your story before and highlighted a few things in it, and I have the little sentence, life is exponentially better, highlighted. And so for you to share with us now, just these great things that you've experienced is really special. Thank you for letting us know how exponentially better, your experience has been. And some historical things, I guess. What did meetings look like when you first got sober, and how did you find your first sponsor, and what's the deal with 3 sponsors? I've never heard that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see him here, but I had invited one of them here. But I still have 2 sponsors. Looking through the chat, so I don't know if Paul is here, but Paul and Cameron are 2 of my current sponsors. I had a third who passed away just a couple years ago, and Harry and I got sober in East Lansing, Michigan, and Yeah, it's I guess unusual. I've learned it didn't seem unusual until I left the Lansing area, but I got sober in this area, yeah, at Michigan State University, and it just so happens that a group that is very large in the Midwest, a men's meeting there called the Dignitary Sympathy Group, got its start on that university campus in a dorm room. Some college students, some grad students had started it in 1971. And so the fellowship there was extremely strong, and especially uh, a strong men's meeting, I guess I would say. And the idea of having three sponsors was explained to me that it was um, to spread the idea that everybody should get sponsees, this increased opportunities for guys to have a sponsee, and that if you got feedback from two or three guys telling you to do something, then that was something you needed to do. It was just like there's no question in it, you know. And so I had three sponsors there, one of which is in his 80s now, and his name is Paul, and he lives in Portland now, um and he became one of my sponsors early on, and he was only sober 2 years more than I at the time, but it seemed like an eternity at that point. And we both stayed sober the entire time. My sponsor, David, who I met when I came out here, he also got sober in that group. He understood this tradition. He went to the same men's meeting. This meeting is a meeting that encourages feedback. I guess that's something that's kind of deterred these days, but there it was encouraged, which is a crosstalk basically. That the feeling was that we owe each other the truth, and that if you see something in me that you think is going to make me drink, that you owe me the truth. That even if it's going to embarrass me or hurt my feelings, by going to that meeting, I'm asking you to call it out. So if some guy is you know I don't know, stealing money from work or something like that, that you're making an agreement with me that I'll tell you, hey, Bob, I think if you continue stealing from work, you're liable to get drunk. And for you to drink is to die, and therefore I owe it to you to tell you, knock it off and talk to your sponsor about it and that sort of thing. So it's been very effective for me in my sobriety. And when I moved out to California, this sponsor, Dave, who's passed away, uh, and I both got sober in that group, started the meeting out here. And the meeting is spread, it's all over the US, all over the world by the same name, typically, or the same format. I've invited a bunch of guys here today that go with me to that group. And we're tight. It's it's a group. It's not just the meeting, it's a group. There's a tight fellowship among us. We support one another, and these guys keep me going. I talk to them every day. Yeah.
Thank you. And so along those lines, would you share with us a little bit about how you work the steps today in your daily life, especially when something challenging comes along?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the things we do at our men's meeting, is that we talk, we keep each other on track with what we're doing for our sobriety by reminding one another that what's really important is not how we think or feel, but what actions we're taking for our sobriety. That every week I'm going to have little fears, worries, resentments, anger, this sort of thing. But what the solution is always the same. It's what's in our big book, which is the 12 steps, and that what actions I'm taking for my sobriety or what keep me on track. So what I do is I start my day, and I do like it describes on pages 86 to 88. I begin my day on awakening right away. I begin with prayer and meditation. And so I flip over on my knees in bed, and I'll mention that even though I'm a Jew, I had a problem with that, praying on my knees, because we don't do that in Judaism. But I realized once one of my sponsors told me, I called whining about whatever. He said, uh, get on your knees and don't get off until you get some faith back in your life. And when I was on my knees, I remembered an incident where I was, you know, a teenager, and I wanted to kill myself, and I was on my knees and, like in the fetal position on my bedroom floor, and thinking about killing myself. And I found myself remembering that. And it was very humbling to remember who I am and where I come from. So I do begin in that same fetal position every morning on my knees, and I say the serenity prayer, third step prayer, the seventh step prayer, and then a whole bunch of other things, defects of character specifically that affect, my kids and my wife and my whole life. I need to ask every day that they be removed. And then I've got right now I'm going to about 6 meetings a week. I end my day with a prayer of thanks. Thank you for keeping me sober today, one day at a time. And then I review my day through the 10th step. As I'm drifting off into sleep, I'm trying to replay my day. Where was I selfish, dishonest, resentful, afraid? Do I owe an apology? Do I need to talk about something at once with my sponsor the next day? I wake up again. I remember, oh yeah, yesterday I was snippy with a lady at the grocery store when she took my cart accidentally. If I encounter a situation like that again, I meditate on how would I do that differently? How do I do it devoid of these defects of character, and picture how I do that in take two. And then I pray for the strength to do that. So I go to these meetings. I try to service through the 12th step through sponsoring many guys. I've got 17 sponsees at the moment. I'm tapped out, but most of them are sober, decades or more. And I've got a few that are new. I've got some guys who have been sober decades, and we're reworking the steps. So I've got 4 guys we're in the big book together with. I get on Zoom with them and read the big book on my lunch breaks at work. So about 3 or 4 calls per week on my lunch break. We do Zoom calls and read the big book together and work the steps. I got one guy who's new. He's under 90 days sober, who's a chronic relapser. He's a guy I love and has been in my life for decades. And I'm a GSR again for the 3rd time. The service keeps me sober. It's a challenge sometimes. I work a lot. I work like as of late, I've been working 60-hour weeks, and I so I've got a very, very full life, right? So I've got 2 kids, a wife, tons of sponsees, tons of sponsors, tons of meetings, tons of hours at work. And when you do the math on how many hours there are in a week, you realize you actually can fit in quite a lot, right? There's like, I forget the math, but there's like 68 hours in a week or something like this. And you start doing the math. I just need 8 hours of sleep a night. So I cram it in. I just like to, cram it in, and it really keeps me happy, to spend all my time trying to spread the 12 steps into other people's lives in whatever way I can.
John, thank you. That wraps up my questions. Carol, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you, John, and nice to meet you, Carrie, the other Carrie. And I have some questions in the chat that I'd like to ask you. I know everybody's putting thank you so much, but some of the ones in the chat were, did New York take out any part of your original story?
You know, I've never done a side-by-side comparison. I have a copy of it here, but I've never like gone. I think that I knew right away that I don't think they took out anything. Oh, yes, they did. Yes. Okay, so I remember now that I had, and I've heard this. So Carol, when you sent me some recordings of some of the other big book authors, it was interesting to hear their experience with this too, that they must have a policy of some sort to take out identifying characteristics or factors. Like they took out, I think I probably put the words Michigan State University in there. I think they took that out. I think they took out the word Chicago area. What, you know, I don't know why they make these decisions, but in retrospect, I think it's because it could identify you, and so they seem to want to make it a little bit more generic. And then I mentioned that they put the word Gregorian in there, which was not a word I would have used. And when I read it, like I said, I had to look up right away, you know, what that even meant. So let me see if I can see what I wrote. New Year's Eve fell in the middle of the trip, and as the Jewish calendar celebrates a different New Year than the calendars Americans follow, so that was what I had written.
Thank you very much. I just want to take a real quick break. Karen, can you put your hand up? Karen, whose story is Crossing the River of Denials here, and I wanted you to meet her. She's the one that asked that question. Karen, if you want to jump in real quick. Can you unmute?
There. Oh.
You're unmuted.
Oh, there. They let me unmute. Hello, John, and thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed your story. And yeah, there's something very intimate when you let us know the backstory and what was really happening, you know, when you wrote these things down. And I truly appreciate your vulnerability. I love men who cry. Carrie, you got a good one. You got a good one. Yeah, no doubt about it. And just so you know, so for my story, they took out a whole story, a whole event.
Huh.
And it was a peace story. See, it was a peace story. And I don't think you can have too many peace stories in Alcoholics Anonymous. Really.
Yeah, we need way more of those, don't we?
I was surprised they removed my peace story. But anyway, I just want to say thank you so much. It was a joy to hear you. And I'm going to have to go now, but I just want to wait until we could be introduced.
Can I ask you one question, Karen?
Sure.
I've only met 2 other big book authors, and someone had told me that there was another author of a big book story in the Bay Area. And was that you?
Yeah, that's where I was when I wrote it.
Aha.
So that was probably me. Yeah.
Well, it's nice to meet you. I've always wondered
Yeah. I think it's really good that people know that we're not just a bunch of old dead white guys.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Anyway. I love your story, Karen.
Yeah,
thank you
love
so
much.
Thank you so much. I love John's too. Thank you. Bye. Nice meeting you both.
Karen, love you.
Thanks.
Okay, so some more questions, John, if you're up for it.
Yeah.
One of the questions was, did you ever make amends for lying about having cancer?
I tried to find that so that tire shop went out of business. It was called Tire America, and it went out of business. Yet I tried to find the guy who was my manager, and was never able to locate him. And to this day, I still occasionally try to look him up on the internet to see if I can find him. I cannot find any clues or anyone by that name. So No, been unable to do so, and that yes, it does bother me. I wish I could do that in person.
Yeah, I've got one like that. Can you expand on the list of powerlessness and unmanageabilities that you did?
Yeah, so for me as a teenager, it took me a while, because when I got in the program and they were asking me, how are you powerless or unmanageable, your life unmanageable, I had comparisons to draw with guys who were much older than me, who had been ruined marriages, who had, tanked careers and, been using for decades. And my alcohol use was limited to just, several years. So I had to put it on terms that were more reasonable for a teenager. So what I identified was my sponsors had said, identify ways in which you had a clear line in the sand for yourself that you stamped out and stepped over it, you know. And so I had dated a girl in high school who was in a drunk driving accident. She was hit by a drunk driver and had her brothers and she had been very badly injured by it. And so I was pretty anti drunk driving, yet found myself in several occasions driving drunk. And in one occasion, we went to a party where there was drinking, and I had just gotten home from visiting Michigan State to visit to see if I wanted to go to the university or not. And at that visit, I stayed at a fraternity house, and I never even I stayed in that fraternity house all weekend long. I never left it. I just stayed there and drank for like 4 days straight or whatever it was. I never even visited the university. I just stayed in the fraternity house. And then I drove home still drunk for, 4 hours, went immediately to a party, a house party, a keg party. And my friend said, okay, you've been drinking all weekend. You don't get to drink tonight. We're going to drink and you're going to be our designated driver. So I made it like an hour. I swear I'm not going to drink. I made it like an hour and said, "Oh, I can just have one beer, right?" And then that went pretty well. So then I made it on to, beer number 2 and 3. And then about like, I don't know what it was, 10, 11 a.m. or 10, 11 p.m., the cops came and broke up this party and ordered all the kids to go home. And so I stumbled out of the party and with all my friends, and we got in my car and they looked at me and they said, "Have you been drinking?" I said, "I'm sorry," and they were furious with me. Nobody would talk to me. I mean, they were all drunk much more than I, but they were really upset. And it took a while to regain those relationships, but that was an example. Lying, cheating, stealing, crossing multiple lines of, stealing was a big one, I think. Constantly stealing alcohol from people, people I loved, lying about it. Yeah, these are all examples for me of unmanageability, powerlessness.
Thank you. Another question is, at what point were you able to move on to step 4, being agnostic, and did you change your belief before moving on to step 4?
Yeah, so this is a story that it seems stupid to me now, but I kind of love is that when I was very young uh and new in sobriety, and I was like militantly agnostic and or atheist and was like argumentative about it, and my sponsor, who was one of my sponsors, who was 19, he was just a little older than me, said, just be open-minded about it. This is the early 90s and open-mindedness was a buzzword. And so the he said, just be open-minded about it. So I kind of took it upon myself to see it as a quest. I remember going to like a park and sitting and looking at nature, and then I was like, he challenged me. He said, just say the Serenity Prayer every day. I don't care if you believe in God or not, just say it every morning. And I was like, okay, just so you know, I don't believe in God, but I'll say the stupid prayer. And so like 30, 60, or 90 days in of saying this prayer and going to meetings, I started noticing that this feeling of being suicidal all the time had left me. And not only that, I started feeling happiness. So like I'd never known a time where I felt happy for like 8 years. And I decided to it occurred to me at a point where I was like laying on my bed listening to my favorite Led Zeppelin album, which was Led Zeppelin 2. And it occurred to me, I was like happy. And it occurred to me that maybe this music is lifting my mood too. And that I couldn't explain it, like there's sound waves coming out of the speakers and you know, affecting my nerves and my ears and sending electrical signals to my brain. And that was like almost like the combination of all these feelings of this feeling better about life and the music. Maybe this is like a higher power in and of itself. And I went to my 19-year-old sponsor, who also had a mullet, and said, hey man, do you think that this feeling when I listen to Led Zeppelin could be my like a higher power? And he said yes. And I was like, all right, I think I could maybe do this thing. And it's so stupid, but it was like that was what cracked the door open for me. And it was a feeling, right? It wasn't like Led Zeppelin's my higher power, or music or nature or whatever. It was just that if I could encapsulate that feeling, like hope and everything's going to be okay, and love and the spirit of the world and the universe, this started to gel. Like this could be of my own making, of my own understanding, and that worked for me. And I was able to go on, as I say, push through to the fourth step and walk through the rest of the steps. That was turning my will in my life over. It was just moving on.
There's somebody I hear, and she said that their conception of God is like George Burns in the movie. Oh God.
Yeah.
I guess you kind of answered this in a way, but it says, can you share more about your practice and relationship with God, and how do you grow more spiritual?
Yeah, so I tried during the pandemic. I mentioned that I was hospitalized in 2020, in the beginning of the pandemic, not for COVID, but for this autoimmune, ulcerative colitis. And I was faced with a big decision. The doctors were recommending that I have my colon removed. And I felt like at that point, I was alone because my wife and kids couldn't come visit me because of the pandemic. They wouldn't allow any visitors in the hospital. And I was doing everything I could to stay connected. I was doing Zoom meetings every day, multiple times a day. That was really all I was doing. I brought my laptop to the hospital, and it was a miserable time. And I had to rely heavily on my higher power. And I decided that even though I'd been sober at that point, about 30 years, I could not rest on my laurels. I was going to have to continue to expand and continue to grow in closeness with my higher power, and add, not rest on my laurels, but add more and more every day. And so it started with reviewing my defects of character, and it's painful, right? Because each of us has a defense mechanism in us telling us to defend the things in ourselves that we see as, like my defects
are actually because like I'm doing the right thing because you're doing the wrong thing, or any of us will fall back on certain fears and feel defensive, usually because of a self-centered fear that prevents us really from looking at ourselves. But I kind of made a deal with myself that I needed to continue doing that, and it was upsetting in realizing how many defects I still have, and every single day it's like, oh man, it's like it's unbelievable when like I didn't think I had so many fears, and I see that it's just always all around me. So one of them is self-pity for me. Like I feel we have these, I love our daughters, but they're teenage girls who, when they reject you, I revert to being a teenager myself. Like, we'd have a 16-year-old and she's kind of exercising what it feels like to be sassy. And I'll like do something like emptying the dishwasher and she'll be like, why did you put the cup there? That's stupid. And I'll feel like resorting to, her level. And so I have to pray like every day. I added to my prayers, God, please help me be kind and not retaliate. That just to keep my mouth shut, and not, it's just like nonstop. I add things to my prayers, and it's a long and getting to be a long list, like the addendum after I do the 7-step prayer of additional things I need to ask to have removed keeps growing. And that's, I guess, one of the primary ways I do that. And then by working with others, I find continually expands my feelings of usefulness towards a higher power, that I'm here to do a job for my higher power, whatever that is. And I got to go out and try to spread this thing and let my life be an example to others and let them see how I'm living, that extending myself can be a relief and remove all this pain.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is, did you meet your wife in the YPAA, and what is your involvement with, did you get involved with young people in AA?
Well, kind of, sort of. Yeah, I was at her first meeting, and I had another girlfriend at the time, but we were young. I mean, we were the same age, and I was sober a couple of years, and yes, we had a Michigan conference of young people in AA conference we were putting on, and I was the graphics guy, and she got on in her early sobriety as I don't know what she did. Do you remember?
No.
But she was on a committee of some sort, and we became friends for several years before we started dating in earnest. And she went off to New York to get a master's degree, and I moved out to California, and we started we stayed in communication. I'd broken up with that other girl years ago, and then we stayed friends and talked on the phone. And I realized, when I was like open to start dating again, that I had this great gal right in front of me the whole time. Like, I need not look any further than Carrie. And so she was dating other guys, and she was involved in a relationship with some guy in New York. And I said, well, I don't want to deliberately upend that relationship for her and inject myself there. But if she breaks up with this guy, and if I feel like it's real, then she's really detached from it, I'm going to let her know how I feel. And I got that opportunity in 1997. And so I told her, I confessed my feelings for her by phone, 3,000 miles away. And we agreed that she could come out. We could see each other within like a 5-hour plane flight. It's not impossible to do a long distance relationship. And we did. And, when she graduated from grad school, she moved out to San Francisco, and that's been together ever since. So yes, we kind of got our start in YPA.
Yeah. So did you stay active in it for a few years then?
Yes, and last year, or was it last year or 2 years ago, the International Conference of Young People in AA came to San Francisco, and we went. We had a blast. I mean, it's obviously mostly, like teenagers through 20-year-olds, but as they say, a young person is anyone who's got room to grow, which is all of us. So we're all welcome there. And so we went and we had a ball. I mean, we just had such a blast. And I remember we saw a table for the Michigan Conference of Young People in AA. And we went over there and we're like, hey, Mickey Pa, we met, and did Mickey Pa, and aren't you excited to see us? And they're like, uh-huh, yeah, nice to see you, and kind of blew us off.
I know you've been generous with your time. I just have a couple questions. There's two I would like to add. One is, were there important things or actions you did in your early sobriety that helped you that you still do? Like I still do the same things now I did in my early sobriety, plus more. So is there something your first sponsors had you do that had a significant impact that you continue or you share with others to do?
Yeah, I think there's probably a ton. But I mean, I run a lot of things by sponsors. I don't want to go unchecked. And I guess people outward looking in would say, aren't you kind of dependent on your sponsors? But I feel like I've heard it said before that sometimes God speaks through people. And I feel like the outside perspective of other people oftentimes can see things when my vision is clouded through subjective, means that they can see things clearer than I can. So I will go to them. In fact, like this whole idea of speaking to you all here and kind of getting outside of myself and this, I've been a little hung up on this thing with the big book for the last 20 years. And that I wasn't clear on how to handle it, and I decided that, well, if I'm not clear how to handle it, maybe I should just keep it quiet. And like I see one of my sponsees, Dan here. Dan has been my longest sponsee I've ever had, and I've been working with him since before my story was in the big book. And so like when I found out, I only told like him, my other sponsee, Brian, and my sponsors. And I said, I don't know yet who I want to tell and how I want to handle this. So I appreciate their feedback. Those guys, I mean, like Dan gives me feedback, and my sponsors have given me feedback that have been on point. So I developed that habit years ago that I run stuff by other guys before acting on a lot of things. And I know when I've got clear intuition from my higher power, and sometimes I need to go to sponsors or trusted friends in the program, and I get the intuition through speaking with them.
Thank you. This question, when I was coming up with questions last year, I guess, early this year when we had other authors come, a couple of them asked what questions that they might have. And this is from one of them. Has having your story in the 4th edition Big Book changed your relationship with other people in the fellowship? And how do people react to you when they learn that the story is about you? Is it different than how people responded previously? And does it create opportunities or issues for you in your spiritual growth or participation in the fellowship? And if so, how do you address that?
Yeah.
It's a
So
lot, but
there's a lot, but no, it's a great story, and like I said, I think that I tended to put people the big book. I mean the big book to me is like saved my life, right? So the people associated with it and the stories in the big book for me. Sorry, one of my sponsors is calling. Let me just uh the stories in the big book to me were like I think I put the authors up on a pedestal, and I learned a lesson not to do that because, you know, put people up on a pedestal and they're liable to fall off that pedestal, that we're all just human. And I think that's why I was so careful with sharing the information about my story being in the book and not wanting to become some sort of circuit speaker. Not that that's wrong or anything, but it just wasn't going to be right for me, um, because I had this propensity to think that that meant you're special, and that I am just another drunk. I am painfully aware of that fact, um, and didn't want to make some AA celebrity out of myself. And so uh, I think my friends in the program, many of guys were on this call, know that I don't want to be treated anything special, and they don't. I'm the only one who thinks it's special. That I spend probably too much time uh, dwelling on that fact that it's just been, part of my anxious, self-centered personality, my self-centered fear that's made it a bigger deal in my head than I should have. I'm glad that it's there and that I've gotten to serve in this unique way. And there's been a few people out there who have told me, I met a kid in a meeting who told me that was his favorite story. Can I, you know, give him your number? And I've talked to those people, and I feel like it's been helpful for them to realize that we're just all people. We're all the same. We're just all people in the rooms trying to live life sober. We're all on the same plane, and that's why it's so important to me to kind of keep it, uh, you know, anonymous and not go out there and circulate this news every meeting I go to. Hey, here I am, your big book author, come kiss the ring. Uh, that it's more, I just want to be a drunk amongst all the other drunks, and that's the best thing for my sobriety is to keep my ego in check.
thank you. And I know that's why it's extra special you're doing this with us. And you and I had long talks about it. And um there, you and I talked about getting to meet some people who had stories, and there's a couple stories like It Might Have Been Worse and Keys to the Kingdom, and how to handle sobriety, you know. And when I was really new, I got to talk to somebody at a conference, and he said his sponsor, we were talking about the big book, and I said, I love the story To Handle Sobriety. And he said, that's his sponsor. And I got his info and I wrote, and he wrote back. And I was just maybe a year or two sober. So is there a story or couple in the big book that when you read it when you were new that really touched your heart and you identified with?
Uh, I mean, there's the obvious ones like Dr. Alcoholic Addict, which I think now is called And Acceptance Is the Answer. That's like a favorite from many people. That's one of mine too. And that's, I believe, Dr. Paul, who lived in this area in the Bay Area, and he's infamous, and joined the tribe, which was removed from the fourth edition, which was
Yeah.
probably, I've always wondered like if that was really it's, it was, for those of you who may not know, it was a Native American who wrote his story, and it was kind of written in pidgin English. And so I always kind of wondered, is this for real or not? But I love the sentiment behind it.
Right.
And and then I mentioned to you that Carrie and I became friends with Bob Kosloff, who was the author of On the Move, who, when I found out one of my friends who ran the archives here in the Bay Area said, hey, you know, there's another big book author in the area, and if you want to meet him, I could probably connect you. And that was Bob. And Bob and I became good friends, and he also was a Jewish guy. And so and he was an attorney. He's passed away, so that's why I'm breaking his anonymity. I think that's okay now. But he was an attorney and became our first attorney when we first had our wills drawn up. And he was a great guy. I'm glad we got a chance to know him and spend a lot of time with him. And he was sick with MS and ultimately succumbed to that during the pandemic. And we could relate on many, many levels. So yeah, those stories are dear to me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I like Join the Tribe too. Yeah, it wasn't, I think Bill knows something about it, but it was a little different than what's in the book. So thank you so much. I don't want to take any more of your time. I appreciate it so much that you did this with us, and we have your permission and to give it out.